The message arrived precisely as I arranged the dining table for our evening meal. She requires our assistance. I'm relocating to be with her. I've already withdrawn funds from our shared account, haha. My hands remained steady as I processed the words. My tone stayed even as I summoned my son for dinner. The sole indication that my spouse of 14 years had demolished our marital union with a single thoughtless text was the unhurried, intentional manner in which I placed my phone down. I gazed at the statement, "She requires our assistance," and subsequently, the ultimate blow arrived. An additional text, one that caused my stomach to plummet, regardless of my determined efforts to maintain composure. "She's expecting, Sophia. We must be present for her. I realize this is overwhelming, but we can behave maturely." Pregnant. A piercing sound resonated in my ears, obscuring my son's humming in the distance. I compelled myself to inhale, to stay motionless, to deliberate. My sibling, Emily, 9 years my junior, the youngest in our family, the one I essentially nurtured after our mother's demise, and my husband. I had dedicated years to cherishing and relying on them both, only to discover that, surreptitiously, they had forged something independently. I proceeded with setting the table, my actions robotic. The cozy radiance of the dining room illumination, the aroma of cooked poultry, my son's guileless voice. Everything felt ordinary, as though my existence hadn't just disintegrated in a solitary instant. I composed my reply. "Congratulations." Devoid of ire, devoid of sentiment, merely that single word. If James anticipated me to succumb, implore, or vocalize my distress, he was soon to be sorely mistaken. The indicators had been present. Reflecting, I could discern them. The nocturnal work hours, the manner in which he had begun being exceptionally benevolent towards Emily, volunteering to assist her in relocating to her new residence, simply monitoring her incessantly. Emily had even jested about her good fortune in having James in her life. Not every male sibling-in-law is this supportive, you know. I had never interrogated it. Why would I? James and I had constructed a life, a dwelling, a kin, a future. We had a 12-year-old son who venerated his father. I entrusted him, and Emily. She was kin. Kin doesn't commit betrayal, until they do. The perfidy didn't shatter me. I was already 2 steps ahead, for 3 months prior I had unearthed something. A receipt concealed in James's jacket pocket. A hotel expenditure on a night he avowed he was socializing with companions. That marked the initial fissure in the groundwork. Rather than challenging him, I had executed something superior. I made preparations. While James was occupied with late-night work commitments, I had positioned myself at my laptop, discreetly transferring my personal savings to a distinct account. The shared account? I retained just enough to prevent him from becoming wary. I had even scrutinized our credit card records, revealing multiple dubious charges, floral arrangements, adornments, accommodations. I had already entertained the notion of an extramarital liaison, yet I never, in my most dire apprehensions, envisioned this. Now, James believed he had depleted our shared account, assuming he had triumphed. He was on the verge of learning the verity. The funds he had siphoned? It was an insignificant amount. The residence he assumed he could abandon? It was registered under my name. The future he had pilfered? It was never his to seize. That evening, after ensuring my son was asleep, I indulged in a glass of wine. The premium bottle James had been reserving for a momentous occasion. This appeared befitting. My phone vibrated anew. "I acknowledge this is arduous for you, but Emily is youthful. She was apprehensive. It simply transpired. We never intended for it to escalate this far. Please, do not render this unseemly." I genuinely emitted a chuckle. Unseemly? He perceived me as the one rendering this unseemly. I savored a unhurried sip of wine prior to transmitting the message to my legal representative, the one I had discreetly engaged 2 months prior. Subsequently, I retrieved my phone and composed my reply. "I comprehend. You are correct. She necessitates your assistance. Attend to her." And then I lingered for him to grasp the snare he had entered. For while James was rejoicing in his novel existence, While he presumed he had absconded with betraying his spouse, his kin, he was oblivious. By the time he ascertained it, it would be irremediably belated. James did not respond to my final communication. Perhaps he was anticipating further ire, lacrimation, a frantic entreaty for him to reevaluate. However, I had presented him with nothing, merely a straightforward attend to her. I envisioned him fixated on his phone, anticipating my disintegration. However, I had already initiated the initial phase of my strategy. The subsequent morning, I adhered to my routine as though nothing was amiss. My son Liam was my preeminence. "Where is father?" he inquired as I prepared his midday meal for school. I presented a smile, maintaining a serene tone. He had to assist Aunt Emily with something. It was not a mendacity. Liam shrugged, too preoccupied with procuring his knapsack to interrogate it. He didn't necessitate the particulars, not presently. As soon as he departed, I made my initial call. "It is time," I informed my legal representative. She had been anticipating this. We had been formulating for months. Phase 1. Immobilize all shared accounts. James believed he had drained our monetary resources, yet the genuine funds remained inviolate. Phase 2. Exclude him from the residence. It was registered under my name, perpetually had been. James had advocated for the inclusion of his name on the title deed the previous year, yet I had dismissed it, asserting we would address it subsequently. Now, subsequently was never. The locksmith materialized within the hour. I observed as our front entrance keys became futile in James's grasp. By midday, I had submitted a petition for marital dissolution on the grounds of adultery. James still hadn't communicated. Perhaps he presumed I was assimilating matters, that I was huddled somewhere, lamenting, while he enacted domesticity with my sibling. I permitted him his delusion for a brief duration longer. That afternoon, while I was scrutinizing legal documents, my phone vibrated. Emily. I deliberated before responding. "Sophia." Her voice fractured. "Please do not harbor animosity towards me." I inhaled unhurriedly. "I do not harbor animosity towards you, Emily." That was the verity. I pitied her. She was oblivious to what she had embroiled herself in. "James conveyed that you instructed him to attend to me," she persisted, sniffling. "Does that signify your forgiveness?" I nearly emitted a chuckle. Forgiveness? James had indoctrinated her into perceiving him as her deliverer, the individual she necessitated. He had murmured dulcet assurances to her while still sharing a bed with me in our dwelling. And presently, he was her predicament. "Of course," I articulated seamlessly. "You will perceive shortly." A pause. I desired to converse with you before you apprehended it from another source," she stammered. "James aspires to relocate to my apartment, yet it is so diminutive. He mentioned perhaps we could—" Ah, there it was. James's strategy had never encompassed assuming accountability. He was relying on relocating back to my residence, the abode I possessed, under the guise of supporting Emily. They anticipated me to permit his return. I suppressed my sardonic grin. "I am so gratified you contacted me, but I am apprehensive James will be incapable of relocating back here." A beat of stillness. "What do you imply?" I peered at the freshly altered locks. "I mean he no longer resides here." Her breath hitched. She was unaware. James had never divulged to her that the residence belonged to me, that he possessed no entitlement to it. I perceived her shuffling the phone, as though averting her gaze, then muffled, she whispered, "James, what does she signify?" I could visualize it impeccably. James congealing, his expression contorting, as he comprehended I had already severed him. That was when I terminated the call. A few hours later, James finally messaged me. "What the hell, Sophia? You altered the locks." I allowed him to linger. The subsequent message arrived minutes later. "You cannot do this. I necessitate returning and retrieving my possessions. You are being melodramatic." My possessions, not our possessions, his possessions. The audacity elicited a chuckle from me. I messaged back, "Oh, I did not alter the locks. The proprietor of the residence did." I could practically perceive his exasperation through the screen. He telephoned. I disregarded it. Subsequently came the next message. You are rendering this more arduous than it necessitates. I presented a smile, my fingers poised above the keyboard. No, James, I am rendering it precisely as arduous as it necessitates. That evening, Liam inquired if his father would be home for dinner. I genuflected beside him, adjusting a lock of hair from his visage. Daddy is sojourning with Aunt Emily for a brief duration, I articulated tenderly, his eyebrows furrowed. Why? How much do you convey to a 12-year-old? How do you elucidate betrayal in a manner that does not shatter his heart? I bestowed a kiss on his forehead. Occasionally, grown-ups make imprudent choices, I articulated circumspectly, and when they do, they must accept the repercussions. He contemplated that for a moment, then nodded. Okay. Okay. One word, a multitude of significations. Later that evening, I received one final message from James. We necessitate a discourse. I deactivated my phone, for once in our marital union, he was the one who necessitated me, and I was not adhering to his regulations any longer. This was merely the inception. James had perpetually perceived himself as invulnerable. He presumed he could prevaricate, defraud, and seize what was not his without repercussions. Today, that delusion would shatter. The initial call materialized at 8:12 a.m. I allowed it to resonate. Subsequently came a text. You immobilized the accounts. How could you? Emily and I require those funds. I savored my coffee, peering at the message before placing my phone down. He was exhibiting signs of distress. I could envision him presently, frantically scrutinizing his banking application, realizing that while he believed he had depleted our shared account, he had, in actuality, absconded with mere pittances compared to what I had discreetly transferred months prior. Another call. I allowed it to proceed to voicemail. A minute later, another text. You cannot simply abandon us with nothing. Emily is pregnant, Sophia. We are commencing a kin. I nearly emitted a chuckle. James had forsaken his initial kin without compunction, and presently he anticipated commiseration for engendering a new one. He was not soliciting assistance, he was requisitioning a bailout. At 10 a.m., my legal representative telephoned. James's attorney communicated. He is alleging you acted malevolently by immobilizing the accounts. I presented a sardonic grin. Did you inform them I executed it lawfully? She chuckled. Indubitably, and that the residence was never his. It appears that was a revelation to him. Allow him to be enlightened, I articulated, agitating my coffee. It is about time he apprehended that actions have consequences. She paused. There is something additional. James attempted to withdraw funds from his personal accounts this morning. Apparently, his credit cards are maxed out. I arched an eyebrow. His lawyer did not articulate it explicitly, she persisted. But I believe James presumed he could subsist on your funds while enacting a blissful kin with Emily. Now he is realizing he possesses no monetary safety net. Excellent. James had been impetuous for years, expending funds as though it would never deplete. Extravagant timepieces, excursions with his companions, a leased sports vehicle. However, he was no longer my predicament. At midday, Emily telephoned. I deliberated before responding, then engaged the button. Sophia, please converse with him. I remained mute. He was oblivious you were going to execute all of this, she persisted, her voice tremulous. He presumed what, Emily? I interjected. That he could commit adultery, pilfer, and still abscond with my dwelling, my funds, my existence? She snuffled. We are expecting a child. And that is my predicament how? A pause, then softly she conceded. James informed me he had everything under control, that we would not encounter hardship. I reclined, exhaling unhurriedly. Emily was youthful, credulous. She had been imprudent, yet I was not engrossed in meting out punishment to her. You made your selection, Emily, and now you must accept it. She commenced lacrimation. I am at a loss as to what to do. We do not even possess a place to reside. My rental agreement expires next month, and James stated. James stated what? Stillness. I already comprehended. James had assured her the residence. That is why he had not been genuinely apprehensive prior. He had presumed he could waltz back in, bring his new kin with him, and I would simply acquiesce. I emitted a chuckle beneath my breath. You are going to have to ascertain it, Emily, I articulated conclusively, just as I did. And subsequently, I terminated the call. At 3 p.m., James finally materialized at my threshold, pounding on the entrance. Sophia, open up! I permitted him to knock. Subsequently, after a minute, I unlatched the door just enough to peer at him, yet not sufficiently to permit his ingress. His visage was rubicund, his hair disheveled. He was not the supercilious individual who had dispatched me that complacent text days prior. Now he was frantic. You necessitate permitting my ingress, he demanded. No, James, I articulated straightforwardly, his jaw clenched. Sophia, do not do this. Emily and I are about to have a child. You are punishing us for something that simply transpired. You perceive this as retribution? I arched an eyebrow. No, James, this is simply you receiving precisely what you merit. His expression contorted. I apprehended you would be vindictive. I presented a sardonic grin. You presumed I would be feeble. He scoffed. You cannot simply expel me like refuse. I was your spouse for 14 years. And you discarded it all for dalliance with my sibling. He flinched. You made your selections, James, and now you get to accept them, just as Emily does. I commenced closing the door, yet his subsequent words halted me. I will contend for the residence. I possess entitlements. I presented a smile. He still did not comprehend. You do not possess a foundation to stand on, James. The residence belonged to me before we ever solemnized our union. It is not a marital asset, and, owing to the marital dissolution paperwork I already submitted, the tribunals will perceive that you forsook our matrimony for another woman. His visage paled. He had not anticipated me to act so expeditiously. I inclined my head. But proceed. Engage a legal representative. Observe how that materializes for you. Oh, wait. I presented him with a derisive smile. You cannot afford one, can you? His nostrils flared. He was seething presently, fists clenched at his sides. I could perceive it, the instant he comprehended that he had outmaneuvered himself. You are going to rue this, he muttered. I shrugged. Doubtful. Subsequently, I shut the door in his visage. That evening, as I savored another glass of wine, I received a text from my legal representative. James's attorney officially acknowledged the marital dissolution filing. Additionally, they are requisitioning a meeting. It appears James is encountering hardship. I presented a smile. This was merely the inception. James presumed he could betray me, pilfer from me, and abscond unscathed. However, I had strategized for this every phase of the way, and by the time he comprehended just how far ahead I was, it would be irremediably belated. James was losing control, and I was relishing every moment of it. The subsequent morning, I reclined in my legal representative's office, scrutinizing documents. James is floundering, she articulated, riffling through the paperwork. His attorney is already inquiring about mediation, which signifies he comprehends he does not possess much to contend with. I presented a sardonic grin. I presume they are anticipating I will be amenable. She nodded. They will likely advocate for some form of monetary settlement, but given that he forsook the matrimony and engaged in infidelity, the tribunals will not be in his favor. Excellent. I reclined in my chair, exhaling unhurriedly. I had dedicated years to sacrificing, compromising, endeavoring to make things function with James. Now, I owed him nothing. By midday, my phone vibrated with a call from an unfamiliar number. I responded, anticipating another legal update. Instead, I was met with a frantic voice. Emily. Sophia, she sounded panicked. He is losing control. He is discussing suing you for monetary damages. He is asserting you devastated his existence. I stifled a chuckle. I devastated his existence? He is destitute, she persisted, her voice tremulous. He attempted to utilize one of his credit cards this morning, and it was declined. And when he contacted the financial institution, they informed him he had overdraft charges. He is imputing blame to me, Sophia. Of course he was. James had never assumed accountability for anything in his existence. I sighed, my voice eerily serene. Emily, what do you anticipate me to do? She deliberated. I am at a loss, but I am apprehensive. He is dissimilar presently. He is not the identical James. He vociferates. He imputes blame to me for everything. He perpetuates asserting that if I had not conceived, none of this would be transpiring. Ah, there it was, the unsightly verity she had not been prepared to perceive. James never cherished her. She was an error he was endeavoring to rectify. I closed my eyes, inhaling unhurriedly. Emily, I articulated tenderly, he is treating you precisely how he treated me. You simply never perceived it prior. Stillness, then a subdued snuffle. I believe I made an error. No, I pondered, you made several, yet I did not articulate it. Instead, I maintained a steady tone. You necessitate ascertaining what is optimal for you and the infant. She emitted a shaky breath. I do not even comprehend where to proceed. My rental agreement is nearly expired, and James was supposed to address everything. He asserted we would be all right. I nearly pitied her, nearly. However, she was not my accountability. She made her selection, and now she had to accept it. I must depart, Emily, I articulated straightforwardly. Attend to yourself. And subsequently, I terminated the call. By 4 p.m., James endeavored to telephone. I disregarded it. Seconds later, a text materialized. You have made your point, Sophia. Now let us be adults about this. Oh, presently, he desired to be adults. I rolled my eyes. Then another text. Look, we do not have to render this a conflict. Just permit me to return and converse. I necessitate a place to sojourn while I ascertain things. I nearly experienced compunction for him, nearly. However, then I recollected. I recollected the ha-ha at the conclusion of his initial text. I recollected the hotel receipts, the clandestine gifts, the perfidy. I recollected the manner in which he had dismissed me as though I was inconsequential, and abruptly I did not experience compunction at all. I composed a solitary response. Ascertain it yourself. Subsequently, I obstructed his number. That evening, my legal representative dispatched me a delightful update. James had formally forfeited access to the last of our shared assets. His lawyer had requisitioned a meeting. They desired to negotiate. I presented a sardonic grin. He presumed he possessed alternatives, yet he did not comprehend I was already 5 paces ahead. James was unraveling more swiftly than I had foreseen. I had anticipated him to encounter hardship, to stumble through the disarray he engendered, yet I had not anticipated just how precipitously his world would disintegrate. I observed from a distance, cognizing that his downfall was of his own undertaking, and imminently he was about to reach rock bottom. James was disintegrating more rapidly than I had foreseen. I had anticipated him to struggle, to falter through the predicament he created, but I hadn't envisioned just how swiftly his world would crumble. I observed from a distance, cognizant that his demise was of his own volition. And soon, he was on the brink of hitting the absolute bottom. At 7:30 a.m., my legal representative contacted me. You will not believe this, she articulated, almost guffawing. I sipped my coffee. Attempt me. James is undergoing eviction. I nearly choked. Eviction? From where? Emily's apartment, she elucidated. Apparently, the lease was solely in her name, and because she has been incapable of maintaining the rent payments, the landlord served them an eviction notice last night. I emitted a subdued whistle. So they are both without a dwelling? Appears so, she affirmed. James must have presumed he could subsist off of you indefinitely. He clearly was not intending on supporting Emily. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. He had forsaken his dwelling, his kin, and his entire existence for my sibling, only to discover himself without a shelter. It was almost poetic. By 9 a.m., I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered, already suspecting who it was, and sure enough, James's voice came through the speaker. You had no entitlement to do this to me. I smirked. Do what, James? Abandon you to contend with the predicament you engendered? You immobilized the accounts, seized the residence, and abandoned me with nothing. He spat. I do not even possess a place to slumber tonight. Do you even care? I rolled my eyes. James, I ceased caring the instant you packed your belongings and departed from my sibling. He emitted a acrimonious chuckle. You behave as though I strategized for this to transpire. Didn't you? I challenged. You presumed you could abscond, construct an idyllic existence with Emily, and still return when you necessitated something. You presumed you could defraud, pilfer, and obliterate our matrimony without repercussions. He was mute. Well, guess what? I persisted. You do not get to enact the victim presently, James. James exhaled stridently. Sophia, listen. Emily is... She is not what I envisioned. She is immature. She does not comprehend how arduous existence is. I smirked. So it had finally transpired. He had comprehended that Emily was not his fantastical escape from actuality. She was a youthful, credulous woman who was oblivious to what she was becoming embroiled in. She is pregnant, James, I reminded him. This is what you desired, remember? He groaned. She desires me to discover a method to rectify everything, as though I possess some sort of enchanted wand. She does not comprehend it. We possess no funds, no dwelling, no future. I interjected. And whose culpability is that? He did not respond. I smiled, shaking my head. You cognize what is comical, James? You presumed Emily was an enhancement. You presumed she was superior to me, more exhilarating, younger, less demanding. But the instant things became arduous, she turned to you to resolve it. And guess what? I allowed the stillness to prolong before delivering the ultimate blow. You were never the type of individual who could resolve anything. His breath hitched. Sophia, please. Just permit me to return, just for a brief duration. I necessitate time to ascertain things. I emitted a chuckle out loud. You earnestly believe I would permit you to set foot in my dwelling again? I articulated. You are deluded. Sophia, do not do this. You are not like this. I smirked. You never genuinely cognized me, James. And subsequently, I terminated the call. But by midday, I received a text from Emily. I am at a loss as to what to do. James departed. He simply ambulated out. He asserted he necessitated space to contemplate. I peered at the message. So James had forsaken her too. It was only a matter of time. He never desired accountability, not for me, not for Liam, and certainly not for a pregnant 25-year-old with no funds. I allowed the text to remain there for a moment, then I composed my response. Now you comprehend what it feels like. And I left it at that. At 6:00 p.m., I reclined at my kitchen table, savoring a well-merited glass of wine. My legal representative had officially finalized the marital dissolution stipulations. James possessed nothing. No dwelling, no funds, no credit, no safety net. He had forfeited everything, and I had acquired tranquility. As I peered at my phone, I observed one final notification. A voicemail from James. I did not listen to it. Instead, I deleted it. For the initial time in 14 years, James was no longer my predicament. The final vestiges of James's presence in my existence were obliterated. The marital dissolution finalized, the dwelling mine, the funds he presumed he had pilfered, immobilized and reclaimed. For the initial time in 14 years, I was liberated, and I had never experienced greater fortitude. It had been 3 weeks since James's ultimate entreaty. I had not apprehended from him since. I comprehended, through mutual acquaintances, that he was ricocheting from couch to couch, crashing with old companions who were swiftly becoming weary of his presence. His savings were depleted, his credit devastated, his employment prospects non-existent. He had incinerated every bridge he possessed, and now he was submerging. Meanwhile, I was flourishing. At 10 a.m., I ambulated into my boutique, the enterprise James had derided as a diminutive pastime, and greeted my personnel with a cordial smile. Sales had been superior to ever. In fact, I was in the midst of expanding, contemplating locations for a second store. My genuine triumph had materialized when I ceased diminishing myself to accommodate an individual who had never merited me. By midday, my phone vibrated with a text from my legal representative. Just a forewarning, James submitted an appeal to reassess the monetary settlement. Judge dismissed it promptly. He was also mandated to remunerate court expenditures. I smirked. Even in his downfall, he was still endeavoring to maneuver his way back, yet this time, no one was arriving to salvage him. That afternoon, while I was finalizing new business strategies, I observed a familiar name materialize on my phone. Emily. I debated disregarding it, yet again, inquisitiveness prevailed. I responded with a straightforward, "Yes?" She deliberated. I merely desired to articulate, "You were correct." I reclined in my chair. About what? About James, she conceded. He departed. He informed me he was not prepared to be a father, and that I should have been more prudent about contraception. I clenched my jaw. Of course he did. James had dedicated years imputing blame to me for everything, and now Emily was his new scapegoat. She snuffled. I presumed he cherished me, but he merely utilized me. And now I am pregnant, solitary, and I do not even comprehend how I am going to afford this infant. I exhaled unhurriedly, selecting my words judiciously. I commiserate with you, Emily, I articulated voraciously, but I do not owe you anything. She emitted a shaky breath. I comprehend. I just necessitated you to cognize I rue everything. I devastated my rapport with you for an individual who never even esteemed me. Stillness prolonged between us. Finally, I articulated, I aspire you glean from this. And subsequently, I terminated the call. Emily would ascertain it just as I had. At 6:00 p.m., I was preparing to conclude the boutique when my assistant ambulated in with an amused expression. You are not going to believe who I just observed outside, she articulated. I arched an eyebrow. Who? James, she affirmed, shaking her head. He was standing across the street, just fixated on the store. I blinked. He arrived here? She nodded. He appeared dreadful, Sophia, like unshaven, attired in the identical garments from days prior, and just forlorn. I peered out the window, yet he was already vanished. Still, I comprehended what this was. He was comprehending what he had discarded. The convivial existence, the stability, the triumph, the woman who had remained by him for over a decade. And now he possessed nothing. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and reclined on the couch, fixated on my phone. James's number remained obstructed, and I possessed no inclination to alter that. I unlatched my laptop instead, perusing locations for my second boutique. I smiled to myself. This was what progressing resembled. Not retribution, not ire, not anticipating an apology that would never materialize, just constructing something superior. For while James was ensnared in the vestiges of his past, I was prospering in my future, and I had never looked back.